Takamine is the living embodiment of flawless perfection at one of the most prestigious high schools, topping the charts in academics, unmatched in athletics, and somehow already holding the position of student council president, all while still being a freshman, and everyone around her can't help but admire her brilliance. The teachers hold deep respect for her, and to most students she feels like someone who exists far above them, untouchable, almost divine, and in simpler words, Takamine is like a goddess walking among mere mortals, while on the other end of that spectrum stands Shirota, her total and undeniable opposite, who floats just under the average line, with messy grades, barely any presence to be noticed, and the constant weight of feeling like a faceless background character in the school life that's supposed to be his own. Yet even with the massive gap between them, Kosha harbors a quiet admiration for Takamine, having shared the same schools with her since they were kids, always watching her stay far ahead of him in every possible way, and naturally, a girl like her never had a reason to even glance at someone like Shirota, or at least, that's what Shirota convinced himself of, until the day he trudges toward his usual lonely lunch spot, burdened by the weight of his thoughts, and completely unaware that Takamine's eyes follow him for a moment longer than they should before she turns away and walks in the opposite direction, and he has no idea that this very lunch break is about to spark something that will reshape everything between them forever. Because Shirota's usual hideout is a long-forgotten storage room used for sports equipment, a place so isolated that no one bothers him there, and while munching on his lunch, he checks his phone for the day's schedule, and instantly regrets it upon realizing that math grades are being released today, which he's sure means another train wreck is on its way. But just as he tries to mentally brace for impact, the door creaks open with a low groan, and his entire body tenses up as the thought hits him. Someone else is inside, so he ducks behind a stack of dusty boxes, peeks out slowly, and what he sees leaves him breathless. It's Takamine, and he's far too stunned to even guess why someone of her caliber would be here. But before he can think more, she casually begins undressing, and Shirota immediately turns away, pulling his arms tightly around himself, trying to resist the growing urge to peek. But when he hears the soft rustling of clothes falling, his internal strength starts to crack, and against all reason, his eyes betray him and take one tiny glance, which burns into his memory forever. And soon after, the lunch bell rings, and everyone drifts back into their classrooms, Shirota among them, still locked in a daze, barely functioning. And when the teacher begins handing out graded exams, he steels himself for the worst, only to be stunned when he finds out he actually passed, and for a moment he thinks maybe there's hope. But then the real shock comes when Takamine receives her paper and the class gasps. She scored only a 98 instead of her usual perfect 100, and whispers ripple through the room like electricity, while Shirota stares at her, puzzled, trying to figure out what went wrong. But before he can even begin to understand, something surreal happens. The air warps, a glowing butterfly flutters across the room toward a random spot, and suddenly a mysterious door materializes out of thin air as glowing lines drift like ribbons, twisting as if time itself is unraveling. And in a flash, Shirota is transported back to that same moment before getting his test score, and as he walks up to collect it again, he convinces himself that it must have been a stress-induced dream or some weird exhaustion hallucination, since passing on the first try was never realistic for him anyway. But then he sees the score, and it's exactly the same as in the vision, and when the teacher calls Takamine's name, he looks up, expecting to see that same 98 again, but this time there's no reaction, no surprise, no whispers, because this time she scored a perfect 100, and it's then Shirota starts putting it together, realizing that all the strange events unfolding today are somehow tied to Takamine, and he decides he needs to confront her directly. So he walks into the student council room, and nervously tells her that he saw her score a 98 earlier, and as soon as those words leave his mouth, the entire vibe in the room shifts. Takamine's stance remains poised, but the warmth in her eyes vanishes, replaced by a piercing cold, and the atmosphere that once felt formal now feels absolutely suffocating. And without even realizing it, Shirota's bag slips off his shoulder, and hits the wall, and Takamine steps in closer, too close, as she starts piecing things together, recalling that maybe, just maybe, Shirota saw something he wasn't supposed to in the storage room, and before he can make an excuse, she pins him to the wall, her gaze drilling into him as Shirota scrambles mentally to explain himself. But then Takamine simply smiles and tells him it's too late now. They'll have to make a deal if he wants to keep her secret safe. And Shirota's heart sinks as he assumes she'll try to get him expelled or worse. So when she hands him a cup of water, his hands are shaking so badly that he drops it, and by sheer luck she manages not to get soaked, while he drops to the ground and starts cleaning the spill in a panic. And just when the moment seems to settle, Takamine takes her chance, slowly removing her clothes again, and suddenly Shirota is yanked back into that same strange realm with the glowing butterfly and surreal door, where a grand chamber full of clocks starts rewinding all at once, and then snap, reality shifts again, and Takamine is now standing there, completely drenched, while Shirota is frozen in place, overwhelmed, unable to process what just happened. And before he can recover, Takamine begins explaining with her usual calm and calculated demeanor, revealing the name of her power, Eternal Weed Road, and she tells him plainly that whenever she removes her plate, she can rewind time, and that just moments ago she intentionally did so to get wet and demonstrate her ability, speaking as if all this is perfectly ordinary, and then she elaborates, saying that whatever she removes disappears from reality altogether, and only someone who sees her plate during that moment can retain memory of the rewritten timeline, which is why Shirota now remembers everything, making him the rare exception. And while his mind reels from the implications, Takamine continues like it's nothing, even sharing the story of the very first time her power manifested, back in 5th grade during a sports festival, when she was expected to win, but the bento she had eaten gave her horrible stomach pain, and while she tried to run through it, she lost control and even wet herself in front of the entire crowd, and in desperation she removed her wet pants, and the next thing she knew, time rewound and she crossed the finish line in first place, untainted by embarrassment, and from that day onward, she knew her power would never allow her to fail. And now that Shirota knows the truth, and Takamine knows he remembers, she casually complains that constantly carrying spare plates is exhausting, and now that she has Shirota, she wants him to become her new closet, which makes Shirota freeze up completely, feeling like he's about to be forced into some permanent servitude, and one thought takes over his mind: run, just run. And as he tries to inch backward, Takamine moves even faster, stepping in and telling him that if he agrees, he won't be a background character anymore, he'll become someone important. But even with that tempting offer, Shirota refuses and heads for the door, slowly creeping toward it step by step, but Takamine cuts him off, and the two of them stumble to the ground, where for a single suspended second, everything feels silent and frozen, until suddenly Takamine lets out an ear-piercing scream that echoes through the hallway, and within moments the door bursts open. A swarm of students rushes in, some drag Shirota away, the girls frantically call the police, and reality hits Shirota like a brick. He's being framed, everything is moving too fast, and before he can react, officers arrive and prepare to escort him out. But just then Takamine speaks again, her voice soft and teasing, asking if he wishes this never happened, and swallowing his pride and fear, Shirota begs her to rewind time, and she smiles with complete satisfaction, knowing she now holds all the power, because if he wants to survive, he has no choice. He has to agree to become her closet, and after a long moment of hesitation, Shirota finally says yes, and just like before, the world morphs into that dreamlike space with floating clocks and glowing lights, signaling yet another reset. And now that the past has been wiped clean, Takamine takes full advantage, laying out his new role, teasing him mercilessly, delighting in his discomfort, and with a grin, she tells him his first task is simple. He has to wear a new plate to replace the one that's been erased from existence, and she playfully blames him for the inconvenience, saying she only removed it for his sake. And when Shirota hesitates for even a second, she sternly reminds him of his place, leaving him no choice but to reach into his bag with trembling hands, pulling out a pink frilly plate, and as he slowly walks toward her, every nerve in his body screaming, he realizes the reality of what he has to do, and has no option to refuse. Takamine, watching him with quiet focus, notices something curious. This morning, when Shirota had seen her plot exposed, he hadn't flinched, but now his eyes remained tightly shut, refusing to look earlier in the student council room, when Takamine had deliberately revealed herself. Shirota had respectfully averted his gaze, and though she had assumed he would behave like every other boy, hungrily absorbing every detail, he had done the opposite, honoring her modesty without being given any real reason to, prompting Takamine to comment casually that he's a gentleman, just as he was back then, even hinting they might have met before. But before Shirota can dwell too long on that implication, Takami assigns him a new task. He must wear the ceremonial gown with his eyes closed, and the moment reminds him of the exact day he'd agreed to be Takamine's private closet assistant, a decision that haunts him even in sleep, as he often jolts awake in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, grateful for a fleeting second that it was all just a bad dream, until reality comes crashing back with the vibration of his phone, and a message from Takamine, casually reminding him of his obligations with a teasing picture of him arriving at school, encircled by admiring classmates. Watching her from afar, he senses a striking dissonance between the Takamine he sees now, and the one from yesterday, wondering if the version who shamelessly exposed herself and conscripted him into servitude is her truest self, while the charmingly sweet and perfect girl everyone else sees might just be an expertly constructed facade. Lost in that thought, Shirota suddenly becomes aware that Takami is standing beside him, smiling like a close friend, and soon curious whispers begin spreading among the students, questioning why someone as adored as Takami would take interest in someone so unremarkable like Shirota. And when Sakami invites her to her house, she keeps her usual bright expression and leans in to whisper softly into Shirota's ear that he's expected in the student council room before homeroom begins. Obeying without protest, Shirota enters quietly, only to be met by Takami's amused grin, and the reminder that they are partners in this mission, handing him a small pouch which he reluctantly reaches into, his fingers brushing against something soft, Takamine's plot, which he pulls out again, and with her typical nonchalant tone, she informs him that he must always carry the pouch with him, especially for situations when she uses her ability, requiring an immediate wardrobe change to avoid wasting any time between rewinds. Takamine then begins lifting her skirt to demonstrate, but Shirota stops her quickly, pleading with her not to, and she transforms his hesitation into a veiled threat, reminding him that she once saved him from serious trouble, and can easily plunge him into it again, leaving Shirota with no real alternative but to comply, after which she unexpectedly confesses that she wants to show her plot to him too. Though it's embarrassing, she claims it's bearable as long as Shirota is only observing, and for just a moment he feels something warm stir inside him, only to remind himself that Takamine is not someone he can ever fully trust. When he shares this suspicion, Takamine laughs openly and admits with amusement that yes, she is manipulating him. This is simply how she operates, and as the conversation ends, Shirota quietly exits the room, though during literature class he finds himself completely unable to focus on anything, his thoughts once again pulled toward Takamine and the unpredictable weight of her power, aware that she's far from a safe idea, but unable to escape the hold she has on him, especially since he has no idea how to monitor or track her ability accurately. Then the teacher calls on Takamine to recite a poem, and she rises with effortless grace, her voice smooth and perfectly controlled like a seasoned performer, captivating the entire class with every word until the room erupts in applause, and even the teacher nods approvingly, making Shirota feel relieved that for once he doesn't need to intervene, at least that's what he thinks, until Takamine begins again, her voice echoing as a gentle breeze flows through the room, bringing an eerie calm like the moment before a storm, and to amplify the effect, Takami unexpectedly declares she'll use her ability, baffling Shirota because the performance already seemed flawless. The next moment, a brilliant flash appears and a shimmering butterfly flutters through a glowing doorway, reversing time until they're once again in the classroom, just as Takamine is called to recite, only this time she pauses briefly, perhaps to clear her throat, waiting until the wind returns before speaking again, and now her timing is so flawless that her words ride the breeze itself, transforming her performance into something timeless and haunting, making it feel as though every listener is reliving a memory she personally wrote into existence. When her final words fall, the entire room holds its breath in silence before breaking into enthusiastic applause, and Takamine silently returns to her seat, casting a victorious glance at Shirota that clearly states this wasn't about correcting a flaw, it was about surpassing perfection, and Shirota, now weighed down by the expectation, flinches as Takami tosses a crumpled paper at his head to nudge him toward his duties again, though he's unsure what he's supposed to do in the middle of class, deciding instead to take action during the break. Seated just a few feet away, Takami subtly shifts in her chair so her skirt rides up ever so slightly, applying silent pressure that sends a chill through Shirota, who now realizes she's intentionally cornering him into completing his task with urgency, and then she intensifies the trap by claiming he's dropped his eraser, even though his eraser remains perfectly safe in his pencil case, a manipulation tactic she's used before, leaving him no choice but to quietly retrieve the small pouch from his desk's side pocket, walking tensely toward her desk, pretending to pick up the eraser positioned right by her chair, then hurriedly returning to his seat, heart racing as he scans the classroom to check if anyone noticed, but all the students remain immersed in their work, allowing him a brief moment of relief that the task was executed unnoticed. As class ends, the teacher announces he's returning homework, giving Shirota another sigh of relief, until he notices Takami has already collected hers and looks vaguely uneasy, prompting him to glance down and realize he hadn't properly arranged the plot, though the mischievous gleam in her eyes tells him she knows exactly what's wrong, and wants him to catch on without her saying a word. Now torn between two choices, do nothing and risk Takamine's plot failing in public, or intervene and risk being manipulated again, he decides to stay put, but just then Takamine's name is called, and Shirota abruptly stands, claiming he misheard the teacher, who, slightly puzzled, calmly instructs him to deliver her homework to the desk, which he does while silently cursing himself for falling into her web again, while Takamine sits with an unreadable expression, and a knowing smile that suggests everything is unfolding just as she planned. As Shirota turns to leave, she swiftly wraps her legs around his ankles, halting him without a word and instructs him with calm authority to do the job right this time, leaving him frozen as he checks to ensure no one is looking, then carefully adjusts the platform with his foot, only to be startled by someone shouting his name from across the room, which causes a tiny sound to escape from Takamine's mouth, and when he glances at her, concerned that someone may have heard, she quickly looks away, her cheeks tinged pink, and her usual poise slightly cracked. Later, alone in the student council room, Takamine praises him for completing the day's tasks unnoticed, while Shirota, still tense, admits he nearly passed out from the stress, to which Takami surprisingly apologizes gently for putting too much pressure on him, prompting Shirota to ask what she would have done if he hadn't responded to the homework mishap, and with a sly smile, she admits she had no plan, she simply trusted that he would act in her favor. Then she turns the question around, asking why he did it, and when Shirota struggles to find the words, Takamine supplies the answer herself, because you don't want anyone else seeing my plot except you, leaving Shirota stunned by the boldness of her comment. Speechless as he tries and fails to deny it, Takamine grins, and says she wouldn't mind if he's a little possessive, to which Shirota, utterly flustered, and as his face turns bright red, he quickly changes the topic and asks about the weird sound he heard. She instantly denies making any such sound and responds swiftly with a sharper tone of brevity. That very night, Takamine heads home and begins prepping her bag for the next day, choosing her plot with extra care, not just for function but to consider which one Shirota might like most. The following morning, her teacher asks her to deliver a tall stack of activity booklets to another classroom, and she accepts the task without hesitation, keeping a calm, composed demeanor. Yet almost instantly, a few classmates eager for attention jump in to offer their help, but Shirota, quietly watching from his seat, notices how effortlessly Takamine attracts admiration. Just as she's about to walk out, he hears her decline the offers and set her own plan in motion. Then it hits him again, that strange sense of repetition, and suddenly time rewinds. Shirota finds himself back at the exact moment her classmates first offered to help, and he panics slightly, unsure what Takamine expects from him, until he remembers her strict words about being ready, not reactive, both as a closet and as her servant, realizing she wanted him, not anyone else, to step forward. A nervous yet resolved Shirota rushes to her side and volunteers to carry the materials himself. Once the crowd is behind them, Takamine halts him in the hallway, her tone steady but not cold, scolding him gently for hesitating and reminding him that she never rewinds for petty things. Every use of her ability has intent, and his role is to anticipate, not respond. Shirota silently reaffirms his vow to support her and protect her secret, and they split the booklets and head toward their destination. On the way, they're interrupted by a swarm of Takamine's admirers, all eager to help or flatter her, and Shirota stays quiet, quietly amazed at how graciously she accepts each compliment, remembers every name, and even offers small, genuine encouragements in return. Later, when they arrive at an empty classroom, she softly reprimands him again, urging him to learn how to read cues better, so he can support her seamlessly next time. Hoping to shift the topic, Shirota compliments how effortlessly she manages crowds, and Takamine coolly accepts the praise, revealing that she's working on public engagement skills, because she's serious about entering the AV industry. She insists that the student council presidency isn't for show, but part of her broader strategy to build real relationships. When Shirota asks if she actually knows every student, she proudly confirms that after being elected, she memorized the names and basic profiles of every single person in the school, explaining that if they all remember her, she should return the effort. As they walk back, Shirota trails a few steps behind, watching her hair sway in the breeze, and despite everything, he feels something warm stirring in his chest. Her motives remain a little murky, but he's beginning to trust in her intentions. Then Takamine casually drops a bomb. She says her best skill is memorizing student profiles quickly, and without hesitation starts listing Shirota's in vivid detail, from his indecisiveness to his academics to his lack of social circle. Shocked, Shirota stammers, asking what kind of simplified profile this is when it feels like a psychological dossier, and Takamine glares at him like he's putting in too much extra effort for her alone. Realizing he went too far, Shirota apologizes, but Takamine doesn't let it slide, slipping into playful mode and teasing him by suggesting he's just interested in her body. Flustered, Shirota turns away and walks ahead, trying to escape the tension, but Takamine lightly kicks him, making him stumble, and when he regains balance, she blocks his view and leans in to ask, "What if I actually let you see me?" Shirota avoids answering, so she pushes further, leaning even closer and repeating the question. He's on the verge of blurting the truth, but instead says he'd rather get to know her better first, which makes Takamine laugh and tease him more, playfully accusing him of wanting to date her. Now overwhelmed, Shirota trails behind her, confused and embarrassed, and just as he tries to catch up, he stumbles hard and blacks out. When he comes to, Takamine is leaning over him. They're in the infirmary, and she explains that his fall was worse than expected, so she rewound time just enough to soften the impact, but still brought him to the nurse's office. Then she pulls him closer until his head is resting on her lap, casually resuming their earlier talk, and concluding that he must really want to understand her deeply. Startled, Shirota bolts upright, realizing not only has class ended, but he's missed his remedial gym session, the one he was genuinely trying to attend. Recognizing his sincerity, Takamine unexpectedly volunteers to oversee the session herself, stunning everyone. Her presence electrifies the room, and suddenly all the students begin pushing themselves harder to impress her, but Shirota falls behind, despite trying his best. Noticing this, Takamine calls him over, fixes his posture, and coaches him personally, though the proximity of her body makes it impossible for him to focus. With a smirk, Takamine snaps him back to reality, telling him to focus, but poor Shirota still finishes last and misses the cutoff time, prompting others to mock him. Then Takamine boldly declares they'll redo the entire thing until it's done right, and everything rewinds again. They're back at the starting line, and Shirota looks to her unsure whether to resume his closet duties, but she tells him to finish the race first. Partway through, exhaustion takes over, and his legs feel like fire, but then Takamine rides by on her bike with flair, cheering the class on, and the guilt of letting her down reignites his resolve. Suddenly, he notices her skirt fluttering up from the wind, and panicked by the idea of others seeing her, he uses everything he has left to sprint ahead and shield her, unintentionally crossing the finish line first. Collapsing from the effort, Takamine comes to him and casually reminds him, it's time to get back to work. Gasping for air, Shirota helps her with the plot, and Takamine informs him with a smile that he actually won the race. He had been so focused on protecting her modesty, he left everyone else behind. Still stunned, Shirota admits that even though it felt great, he's nowhere near her level. Genuinely pleased, Takamine tells him to go home. That evening back at his house, Shirota realizes he accidentally kept Takamine's plot bag and decides to return it the next day. But curiosity gets the better of him, and he almost peeks inside, until his phone rings. It's Takamine casually asking about the bag, and hinting she's unable to go for her run without a plot, making it clear she's summoning him. With her house nearby, Shirota decides to return it immediately, wondering if this is another test of his role as a closet. He reminds himself the job is strictly school-based, no personal involvement, but then his phone buzzes again. Takamine has sent him images, each one a bit more provocative than the last, each paired with playful messages about how badly she needs that specific plot. She claims none of the others work and jokes that he should have already left. Then comes a final image. This time Takamine is clearly outside, and Shirota freezes, realizing with horror that she's really not wearing one. His heart skips a beat. He worries for a second. What if some random guy sees her or something goes wrong? But quickly shuts the thought down. Takami isn't some helpless girl. She's actually stronger, smarter, and way more capable than he is. Yet she still asked him to protect her, and that alone is enough to make Shirota take off running straight to the park without wasting even a moment. And when he arrives, panting and a little out of breath, he spots Takami sitting calmly on a bench, looking just a bit winded herself, and the second she notices him, she immediately scolds him for being late without holding back, but then quickly softens, thanks him sincerely for coming, and playfully teases that he's now acting like her personal locker, and not just in school, but out in public too. And surprisingly, she seems to be really enjoying it. She catches the flustered mess of thoughts running wild in his head and grins as he awkwardly denies everything, pretending like he wasn't thinking anything weird and insisting he was just genuinely worried that something might have happened to her. Takami suddenly goes quiet, turns around, and her cheeks flush a soft red, which makes Shirota panic inside, thinking maybe he said something wrong. But then she spins back toward him and gives him the kind of sweet, soft smile that's completely different from her usual one. So much so that Shirota freezes up on the spot, as if time itself just slowed down around him. Though before things can get too heavy, she laughs and playfully shifts the tone again, saying he should feel honored to have seen that rare side of her, leaving Shirota a little stunned and confused as he wonders if he's actually special just because he remembers her secret ability. But before he can get lost in those thoughts again, Takami yanks him back to reality and asks if he's truly okay with worrying about someone like her. Then she casually holds out her hand for her bag, and when Shirota hands it over, she notices it's still really warm, meaning he must have been clutching it tightly the whole time. And with a sly grin, she teases him, asking if he did anything inappropriate to the bag, which turns Shirota beet red as he fumbles to deny it. But Takami just giggles and moves ahead, thoroughly enjoying herself while he chases after her, still trying to defend his honor. Soon after, the swim class begins, buzzing with energy, and in no time at all, Takami easily beats a seasoned member of the school's swim team, someone who's been training for ages, and her win is so smooth, confident, and clean that it leaves the entire class absolutely stunned, though Takami doesn't seem even slightly satisfied with the victory, and out of nowhere, she declares there's going to be a rematch. Shirota is completely thrown off, especially when he starts feeling that strange sensation again, as if time just rewound itself, and before he can fully register it, he's already at the starting line again, watching as Takami begins swimming with the backstroke this time, and it's then that he notices something different about the way she moves. The backstroke offers a much clearer view of her body, and although he tries hard not to look, he accidentally meets her eyes and quickly looks away, flustered and embarrassed, heart pounding as he prays no one saw that moment. And just like before, Takami wins again and climbs out of the pool with that same unshakable grace, coming directly to him and reading his face like an open book. She asks if he tried to steal a glimpse of her time again, wondering aloud why no one questioned her about using rewind when she'd already won once. Caught off guard, Shirota mumbles that he didn't get a chance to ask, and Takami, ever the perfectionist, explains that for her it's not just about winning, but about doing it in a stylish, unforgettable way, which is why she went with the backstroke to change the vibe entirely. Then she leans in close and asks if he personally prefers freestyle or backstroke, and Shirota completely freezes, realizing that choosing backstroke would basically mean admitting he enjoyed the view. But before he can dig himself a deeper hole, Takami beats him to it and starts teasing him again for ogling her, turning his face bright red as he stammers and desperately tries to shift the conversation, finally blurting out a question about how she managed to use her powers while swimming, when he never even saw her wearing a gown. Takami, clearly amused, tells him to look more carefully next time, and Shirota finally realizes she had been wearing a special gown designed not to reveal anything, an anti-tent outfit, and now he's even more rattled, struggling to keep a straight face while she smirks and casually says she'll be seeing him again after class in the afternoon. They head to a department store next, where Shirota finds himself standing awkwardly in the women's plots section, completely overwhelmed and unsure where to look without coming off as a creep, while Takami revels in his obvious discomfort and tells him he's going to help her pick out new plots, since she'll be the one dressing him up now. And although Shirota wants to protest, he knows it'll only earn him more teasing, so he gives in, closes his eyes, and randomly grabs a set of plots, only to be hit by Takami's teasing gaze as she inspects what he's chosen, making him feel the burn of secondhand embarrassment from anyone who might be watching. Out of sheer curiosity, he peeks at what he picked and lets out a soft, horrified yelp. It's something wildly revealing and not at all appropriate, and he hurriedly stuffs it back, vowing to take this task more seriously from now on. After scanning through the options more carefully, his eyes land on a light blue piece, simple, elegant, and for some reason it just feels right. So he hands it to Takami without overthinking, and she raises an eyebrow at the choice, clearly intrigued, asking what made him pick that one. But all Shirota can do is shrug and dodge the question, not wanting to get teased again. Then without warning, Takami announces she's going to try it on, and casually yanks him into the fitting room with her, saying not to worry because she's wearing dark tights underneath so nothing will be visible. But Shirota's brain short-circuits at the thought, and he turns away in panic, face burning red, while Takami giggles at his overreaction, and tells him that helping her like this is becoming a habit now. Under all that pressure, Shirota actually faints and collapses, which makes Takami briefly panic, but the second he regains consciousness, she's right back to teasing mode, mocking him for passing out over something so harmless. Later, when they're alone in the elevator, Takami circles back to the earlier question, this time more firmly, and demands that Shirota explain exactly why he picked that particular plot, placing both hands against the wall and boxing him in completely, leaving him nowhere to escape. And finally, after gathering all the courage he has, Shirota admits that the soft blue color reminded him of the sky and the sea, two beautiful things that felt absolutely perfect for a girl like Takami who's always seemed elegant and slightly distant vibe. And says, don't forget to hit that like button, smash subscribe, and hang tight. There's more coming in the next part.